A period in CS that I found rather curious, quite peculiar, but very interesting, quite fascinating and attractive as an intellectual idea, was earlier this year, around October, when KRiMZ, the Fnatic player, became, at least for that period of time, probably the best player in the world. The player who had the most impact on the game. He was even the guy who was getting the most kills in every game. He was dominating finals, big time player in every single match. He was like the backbone of what was making Fnatic on top of the meta game and on top of the other teams. And he was the best player for his team. And so what's interesting about this is, what it really highlighted to me was that one of the best things I think about CSGO is that you can actually be the best player in the world and you can be the star player from almost every single position in the game. And this is actually something that CSGO shares with one of my favourite games, basketball, actually. Because in basketball, if you were talking on paper, hypothetically, how the game should be played or the right way to play, then what you would have done in the past is you would have designed the game so that you would have your superstar best player would be the center, the big guy in the middle who's down low, and the idea is he takes the shots that are the easiest and going to make the highest field goal percentage because he's the closest to the basket, and sometimes he's even just getting directly to just put it into the basket. And so you design your whole team around having him as the star, and then players who could feed him the ball, and then players who could open the floor up and get him space to go in. And so that's how you design it. And so on paper, that's actually how basketball was played for a long time. Like the great players of the 50s, 60s, these were the centers. These were the guys who were like some of the best players ever and were dominating the game. Now, in later years, it got opened up a little more. Some of this is to do with rules. People become more athletic as players. People understanding cutting and how the tactical side, X and O's of the game goes. But now you got it so that you could actually have wing players, perimeter players, the point guard who passes the ball. He could now actually still dominate in the game. You could have the shooting guard. That was one of the interesting things people didn't know. In fact, I'll use this as an example now. People don't know this about Michael Jordan, but one of the things that makes him probably the best player ever is like the impact he had on the game was not that he was just the best player, but he did it from a position which traditionally you weren't supposed to be able to be the best player in the whole world from. Like, yeah, Dr. J had done some stuff around like small forward type position and stuff, but you weren't supposed to be the shooting guard and do that. The idea of the shooting guard in general was it was just a guy who would make really good field goal percentage, and you just, like Reggie Miller style, you'd hit him with the ball open. Hopefully he keeps some threes for you, maybe 4 or 5 threes he'll take a few two-point shots when he's open. You're not supposed to go from that position and take the majority of the shots and dominate the whole game. But Michael Jordan was such an amazing player with his skill set and the way they shaped teams around him that he was able to be the best player in his team, best player in the world, best player ever from that position, which wasn't a traditional carry role. And so that's exactly what we're going to get to here in terms of KRiMZ, because just as in basketball, like I'm saying, every single position now has had its superstar players, best players from those positions. We can see this in CS, and so I'm going to pick out some examples of some players who've been like amazing players in CSGO, and you're going to see how they play totally different styles, different distinct roles and positions in their team, but by being amazing at that individual aspect, they've been able to be the best, or one of the best at least. So in KRiMZ's case, his is very unusual because first of all, he is a support player. Now traditionally a support player is supposed to naturally be one of the weaker players, not great skill, not great dueling ability, not like great at racking up kills. Generally a support player's job is like hold a spot and always do that and just be reliable so that other players the star player can be set up to do what he needs to do. He has cover, or someone who's going in first to die here, so, well, not necessarily die, but draw fire attention and so the star can kill them, or a player who just holds the back while someone goes off and does something. Whatever this position is, it's typically given to players who aren't as skilled, but maybe they have a more mental capacity for the game to think about the tactics, or maybe they're just players who they just work well with others. That's their natural strength, is communication, knowing what someone needs, being able to read the game in that sense, but it's not outright skills. And so people get confused on this point because they think support player means, because it's attached to a lot of those things, typically, stereotypically, they think that means support player is someone who fucking sucks and can't kill anyone and never gets in position to top fight. They have all these weird associations which generally there would be something to it, but that's not what the support role technically is. And so the reason why it's most interesting in KRiMZ's case is because he was a pure support player. Actually, back in LGB, this guy was invisible pretty much. You never saw him do anything in the game. The game was always won or lost by like all of them, AWPing, rifling, Dennis having a great run of form, Twist had some spectacular moments. it was never down to KRiMZ. You never even really noticed him. He was just a guy who was there. Maybe you'd see him get killed, or he'd be off the side helping in some sense. But in this Fnatic team, he had this run where it was, face it, Season 2 LAN, it was ESWC, then Fragbite Masters. These 3 LANs, he was, I think, probably the MVP of all 3. He was the best player in the world. His impact was amazing. And so he was a support player. But that's the thing, it's not that he changed into a fragging role. That's now how he dominated. He was still just a support player, but he dominated from the support position. So what are the strengths of KRiMZ? Well, first of all, he has amazing ability to defend small bomb sites. Now, the best area we've seen this on is Inferno B bomb site. Usually, it's really hard to hold that site. Like, typically, the way even top teams it gets played on that map is that the terrorists can take the site if they go in with 4 or 5 people. They're going to take the site, and then the idea is you're either going to pull off and then go straight back in, or you're going to do a full retake when your other people have come back. And so sometimes some teams even play knowing that if it's a full rush, they'll even give up the site and try and take it back in a minute. Fnatic can literally lock down that site and not even have to give it up, because KRiMZ is so amazing at holding it. And there's a variety of reasons as to why that is, because he knows the angles to take. He's very consistent with what he can do from those positions. Like, if he picks a position at a certain angle, then it's like you can tell he knows in his mind, like, okay, that'll be the first kill if this guy comes here, then I'll have to pull back to go over to here. But it's never like, oh, sometimes I might just kill 3 from here, and other times, oh, I'll just whiff completely. Like, he's very consistent in that sense. And because he's so consistent at holding this small site and dominating there, first of all, it kind of forces the terrorists to go to the other site, unless they want to just feed kills to him and become impotent. And then because they're having to go to the other site, the bigger site, in this particular case, Inferno, I'll use this as the example. Well, the trick is CT on Inferno, and this is something Pronex's teams especially have always abused, is it's actually a Swedish way of playing the map. If you were back in 1.6, your main dynamic in the game is you want the second defender in B to be picking the right times to rotate over to A before the terrorists even attack. So you actually end up with 4 holding A, because A is the big open site, it's harder to hold that. Well, if you are 4 there, you can lock it down completely. But obviously it's risky because now you've only got 1 B. So famously, there was another Swedish player who was awesome at this role that KRiMZ does. It was Face from SK Gaming, the Swedish team. He used to do the same thing. He was so good at holding that small site, so reliable, so excellent at always getting a kill here and always getting 2 kills if they come here, and always delaying 10 seconds if they come here, and always being able to hold off with the right timing of a smoke or a flash, that it meant that Robban, the rotating guy, could always rotate over into the A site, into the arch area, and he could always be there. So as a result, when you're trying to attack the A site as the terrorists, there's always that guy to your left there. Yeah, there's the guy in the library area or at the corner, but there's always one to the left, so it makes it super hard. You have to go lane, you get slaughtered, or you split up, and now you're having to fight on 2 angles or with perfect timing. This is how you dominate the map on CT side, and you can see when I explain it like this, how KRiMZ's role and being the best in getting all those kills has actually made it so that it's not just his site and his kills that are having this impact, because the rotator often has been all of them in this team. They work together at that site, so now all of them is freed to rotate over, and now he can be picking up kills at the other site and having a presence there, yet B is still defended. In this particular sense, KRiMZ has been the perfect star player for the Pronex style, that gambling style of playing the defense like that. I think originally the team that probably invented that style or pioneered it the most was probably actually MTW, the Danish team back in 1.6. They used to have Zonic do that rotating role, because likewise, they had a super sick player who was the support player. He wasn't the best player, but he was a player called MG, and he was really good at that one role. If you have that special tool of the small site holding guy like that, very reliable, then you can afford to play this style and you will dominate CT side. So they were an awesome CT Inferno team. Fnatic is probably the best team in the world and the best CT team and the best Inferno team. So add that all together and it's coming from KRiMZ's play. Secondly, not only does this style of game open up Fnatic in terms of all of them, then having this amazing lockdown defense, it opens up JW's game, because now there isn't pressure on JW to drop 25 each half or to get crucial open kills as CT, for example. Now JW is very much free to go wherever he wants on different rounds. You've got this super solid guy in small sites, KRiMZ holding the site, and then you've got this great dynamic of all of them coming over and coming back, depending on which site they're going to attack and how Pronex is reading the game. Then Flush is quite consistent at the other side, so he provides a backbone with KRiMZ where it's like a very solid defense and a very certain number of kills in positions that are going to come. Then JW's wildcard sort of play of peeking and aggression and just trying to go crazy, or sometimes being somewhere unexpected, that now has incredible power to just totally throw everything off for the opponent. There's nothing they can do. In terms of how KRiMZ is able to do that, part of how he does it is not just good game knowledge and reading of like, where should I be now when this happens, like a flowchart almost, or if they're going to attack in this sense, if I stand here, yeah, I could maybe get a highlight round of 3 kills, but I'm out in the open, so maybe I stand here and I always get this kill, and that means my teammate learns that that's how I do it, and he always knows to be looking here or to flash in afterwards. One of the best qualities of KRiMZ in this sense, and why he's so consistent, is that his aim is really consistent, because the same philosophy applies into his skill set. His crosshair placement on when to put it, like at this part of the corner, or should I put it that far out, or should it be right on the edge? Like, you know, JW will aim with the AWP like right at the very edge of the wall, because he tries to shoot super fast shots and then run away or go back in. Instead, KRiMZ is like that guy where he gets his range for where to aim is really solid, and he's going to aim here and he's going to shoot in this particular way, really nice, solid, consistent spray, a couple of bullets. Then he's going to shoot here, really consistent, and everything is just consistency. It's just flowing. That's why, under normal circumstances, this would just be a support player, just a guy who doesn't have super game normally with other people, trying to just get what he can done, be consistent, reliable, get this kill, help this guy shoot, do some damage here, so my star player, guy that maybe that I'm backing up, if it was Olaf M in this case, he can get the kill or whatever. But in this particular case, KRiMZ has perfected his skill set to this degree that he's actually the best player on his team, and he's been dominating. Admittedly, what's interesting about this example as well, and I've done the video now, is that he has dropped off a little bit over the last couple of tournaments. He hasn't really been that best player in the world, and so it'll be interesting to see going forwards, was this just a streak? Because this perfectly fit into, if you think about how he was dominating, it did actually, he was a big factor as to why Fnatic was dominating that way, but the same goes the other way as well. It fit in with when Fnatic was dominating as the best team. They were the best Inferno team and they were the best CT team. Now, some of those factors are a little bit more questionable. Yeah, they still are the best in all those areas, but it's not by a massive amount anymore. There's a bit more play there, as we've seen. They lost to Virtus Pro, almost lost to Titan, lost to LDLC, technically. We've seen there's more play to this, it feels like. So let's watch as the next 3-6 months of 2015 come along. Will KRiMZ still be at that level? If he isn't, will it affect Fnatic? Maybe he'll actually return to that, but at least for a time, it looked like he was the best player in the world. Now that I've done KRiMZ like that, I'll just kind of cite some other players in CSGO who've been great players, or the best, but from totally different positions. So the first one you have to bring up whenever you talk about the greatest players in CSGO is GetRight. He's the best player of all time in the game. And I think this last 6 months is the only time I've ever seen him drop out of like top 2 players in the whole world. Now he might be like, who knows, maybe 7th best player or something, maybe even worse because of how some teams have done and how badly his team's done. But this guy was amazing. Crucially, he was playing that lurking role. Now, normally the lurking role isn't like a guy like a sport player who doesn't have that much skills. Usually it's the guy in the middle. Usually you want it to be like your Swag or probably NBK, these sorts of players. And the idea here, the concept, is that they're quite skilled, but they've also got like a good intuitive feeling of when to like attack and do a backstab and kill someone in the back, or when to push in to have presence on the map so that your team can attack somewhere else, or when to sneak around in a 1v2 or a 1v3 and be able to win it by setting up those 1v1s instead of getting caught against 2 people and you can't kill them both at the same time. Usually you want a guy with a bit of brain, a bit of intuitive power and good skills to be able to win those. Well, that sort of guy, if you think historically, even when they're at the best, they don't tend to be the best in their team. They don't tend to be the best in the world. What they do is they're the guy who they create kills out of nowhere and they get these great 1v1s and stuff. And so as a result, they'll win like, you know, also Flesher obviously is a player who's done this as well. They'll be able to get those like solid, like, oh, I know I'm going to get like 15 to 18 frags when we have a good half with that player, and that's what he's going to contribute in these particular areas. But again, they're not the dominating. GetRight did all that. But first of all, he did it so well he would dominate. Like, you'd know he was going to come behind you at this point on Inferno, this area of B, and somehow he'd rotate there and he'd get 3 kills on you. And you'd be like, how we knew that he was going to be there, but his sense for when to do it and how to do it, and his skill set was fucking amazing. His skill level was, I won't say skill level, because Forrest's skill is the primary factor, but I'd say like his manifest skill, like taking his talent and then putting it through the filter of his technique and his development of how I'm going to use my skill and place it into the game. And whereas someone like Scream has incredible skill in terms of headshot aim, he can't always manifest it on the game and get those kills every time and push it through in this way and be polished and refined, whereas GetRight could do that. And so he was the best player in the whole world. He was dropping 20, 30 frags like all the time in early CSGO. He was just dominating people by himself sometimes. And then you had really good players on NiP and they were just unstoppable. They were unbeatable. And he's always been there. Every time NiP's been good, he's been a core factor. Interestingly, that's also why it's interesting to bring him up now. He's the only one who wasn't actually that good in the NIP team that went to the final DreamHack and like 1 round from winning the whole tournament. That he actually dropped off a bit. He didn't really have that many good games in that one. He was a hero in Cologne in certain maps, especially that last map against Cloud9. So get right, obviously, we have to pick out there. Somehow lurking, but being the best player in the whole world. Shocks. People don't fully understand. I'll probably do something about this at some point, but his impact on Very Games was incredible because the Very Games was the best tactical team. They had the best unit of pieces that had set roles and worked it their own way. They had the best breakdowns and reading of the in-game leader, knowing what to do, but they couldn't always execute it. And in came Shocks. And he literally, if he wasn't the best player in the world, he was able to sometimes have the most impact of any player in the world because he was the mid-round master. Not a lurker, not an entry guy. He was just sort of the guy who flowed around in the middle, and he had a lot of autonomy. That's the key thing. He wasn't being told anything to do, and he never quite knew. He would just flow around the map, and he would get 2 kills here, or this site would be being overrun, and he'd come right in and he'd take it back, or he'd come around late and he'd win an amazing 1v2 with sick aim, and basically it just made it so hard to attack them when they were on CT. And then on Terrorist, he's the guy who'd sort of, you'd take some ground as Terrorist, then he'd come in as a Terrorist, and he'd be able to close the round out, and he'll be able to take he'd like take the baton, take the ball, and make a play from it. And so as long as you set it up to be around him, he was in some ways the best in the world, one of the best ever. And you see that that's what he hasn't done in this other team here. Sometimes they fucking make him go in first, etc., which on Terrorist side, which is like, I don't even know what's going on there. But clearly Happy has different ideas about how CSGO works than Thorin, so we're all allowed to have our own ideas. Shock's one of the best ever. KRiMZ, the player I think is the best now. Yeah, there's loads of people who can AWP. On LAN, not so many. No, even on LAN. Players who can AWP. Everyone can AWP of these players just from stationary CT positions where it's the obvious position. You sit there, crosshair on the corner and try and fire when people move there, or move on to people a little bit. That's like very basic. That shouldn't even be considered like you're an AWPer. You're not like a top level player if you do that. Like that's the sort of thing like Sean Gares can do. Yeah, he's okay. He'll get some kills. He's not bad at doing it. He's not a sick AWPer though. What makes KRiMZ amazing is not only can he do all of that like a god, he can do every other aspect of AWPing. So he can actually be mobile, moving to different areas, flowing across the map, getting kills here, it really throws the terrorists off. What did they do? That's why Titans had all these dominant CT sides of like 16-1 on Dust 2 CT side. It was like unreal stuff. That used to be a fucking T-sided map. Another thing KRiMZ can do that so many AWPers can't is, yeah, some AWPers can take that first shot to enter the site. Like they just go on Inferno, they stand on that fucking, on the T-ramp and they just look up and try and kill you. He can aggressively push in like he was a rifle player with the AWP and pick off a kill there and open a site up like this way and dominate the other guy when he's doing those duels so much that that guy now can't even show, and the CTs have to be more passive in their defense. They can't even attack you. This has allowed him as an AWPer in CSGO especially, where it has less of an impact as a gun compared to some of the other versions of CS because you can't no-scope as reliably. An AWPer is supposed to just be a player who, when he gets hot, he has a big half for you and he can maybe win the game for you. But otherwise, he's just picking up like tactical kills. Like he got the first 1v1 right, we can go to that site, lads. Or he gets some information looking here, or he just holds a spot by himself. KRiMZ has been able to dominate the whole game by doing this, dropping like 40 frags, 30 frags, having insane get. And as a result, his Titan team isn't even good at the moment. At least we haven't seen how RPK's running, but when they've had this stand-in, they've had a lot of problems. Even before that with the Kaylee lineup, they weren't even close to like a top 3 or 4 lineup, but they were capable of potentially winning an event or beating Fnatic or LDLC. Just an amazing team, and partly because based around him and his skill set, and he's the best. He's doing what he does, his role, the best. Sick T-side aggro AWPer. There aren't any others like that who can dominate the whole game and be a star. So now that we've named all these different players who've done all these different roles but been the best from them, let's just quickly at the end address a couple of players who their skill set actually you wouldn't want them to be the best. And it would be interesting if any of them can become the best, because I'm not sure how it would fit in. I'm not sure how a team would work around them. So the best number one that's coming to my mind because of this discussion we've had here is JW. Fnatic has been at their best when JW hasn't had to be their best player. In the old Fnatic, he was their best player. It was set up so that he would have an AWP whenever he wanted, a rifle whenever he wanted. He would be in position to do all the stuff he wants to do. But first of all, he seemed to have some sort of choking issues or performance issues against the big teams on LAN. And secondly, he just wasn't effective in game. He didn't have a big impact. He wasn't able to get that many kills. He wasn't able to stand out like a superstar. So I think that the position he's in now is clearly the better role, where a lot of the pressure's off him and he's just free to move around and be a sick wildcard. Because if he's just a wildcard and he's your second or third best player and just having to contribute a bit, then when he has the 25 frags, you're going to be unbeatable. You can't stop that. So he's a good example of someone you probably wouldn't want as your star. The second one, let's go to LDLC, KRiMZ. KRiMZ is a guy where his problem is, he reminds me a bit of Bialy actually. their aim can be 10 out of 10 on some rounds. Just fucking insane aim. Like either one bulleting people, one don't do. Like how do you do that? Or doing like a 6 spray that just kills 2 or 3 people in one instant. So it looks like, wow, 9 or 10 out of 10 level aim. Oh my god, this guy must be the best in the world. No. The rest of the rounds, they'll have 7 out of 10 aim. And they'll try the same sort of move, the aggressive move. But because the aim isn't there, yeah, they just die. They just get some shots off. They have an okay half. So they can't really exert themselves on the game. Like actually him playing so well at DreamHack Winter, I think is, well, that's why I called him the MVP. Cause to me, he was the difference maker to help them get over the hump against Fnatic, to help them get over against an IP in the final. I think if he hadn't done that, if he'd played at his old level at the previous tournaments, I think they would have lost actually in all those rounds. So for me, I don't want him to be my star player. He might be able to be a good second star if he can round his game up a bit more, but if you have him as a third star, sort of that JW wildcard role within the team where it doesn't have to contribute the massive amount of frags and certain consistencies, that's probably the solid place to have him, which is I think where they've got him at the moment. The last one I'm going to go with is going to be Scream, because we saw that when he was in the old Very games, which is now Titan, before they got Shocks, so they had Kenny S and Shocks, Scream were the 2 players, they were their 2 stars. And in theory, when Scream came in, because Kenny S had been having his issues with being like a star within their team before, Scream was going to be the star player. He had like the sickest aim, he had all these 1-bullet headshot fucking highlights where everyone was like, he is a god. Like, he looked like he was just made for CS frag movies. But actually, that's when their team struggled. They dropped off coming second all these times, and suddenly they were coming like semi-finals. They made like a 58th once. Actually, I think that might have been later. I might be a mistake there. I think they made like semis each time, I think, or 4th place, or, you know, that sort of a range. Suddenly they dropped off actually their level because he wasn't able to have that much impact. Yeah, he had this super sick aim. Like if you put him in a 1v1, he could just totally one-bullet headshot the guy instantly, and it was like, the round's already over. There was not even any fight to that. Didn't even have to use his brain that much. His problem was his aim was inconsistent. For having such sick raw like tracking aim and flick, like, what would you describe that as? Probably just reflex, precision reflex, as in if he just flicks like that, it always goes to the same spot and just goes right on. Whereas other players have to flick and to some degree guide it, like it's on or off. Yeah, it's on now. His was so sick that if he'd have had the mentality and the mental game of a Shocks, he could have dominated the whole world and been the best player. But actually, he couldn't. For some reason, within his teams, he's never quite been able to do that. And if you have him be your best player, you're either going to be like a bum-ass team, like a bad team like Epsilon, and probably he'll get his kills, but he won't be able to necessarily win games that often. Yeah, it's hard. I don't think Scream's even figured out quite his role yet, or how to use his skill set. That's the example, actually. The guys who you don't want as that, it's because they've still got something missing a little bit, in mentality usually, in terms of how they themselves see their own game and getting consistent performance, which is what someone like KRiMZ had mastered at that point when he had this run. So those are the players who I think are the unique stars, but can dominate from any position in CS.